I never expected to find myself in a legal battle over my own daughter. But here I am, facing off against people who claim to love her while trying to strip me of my rights as her mother. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Rachel, and I'm a 30-year-old single mother to my beautiful 2-year-old daughter, Sophie. My pregnancy was unplanned. I had a casual, no strings attached relationship with a man named Ethan, who lived in another state. We weren't serious, but when I found out I was pregnant, everything changed. Ethan and I discussed our options, and I ultimately decided to keep the baby. To his credit, he wanted to be involved in Sophie's life, so we agreed to co-parent separately but together. Then, everything fell apart. Ethan died unexpectedly during my pregnancy. It was a devastating loss for his family, and I felt it too. He may not have been my partner in a traditional sense, but he was still someone I cared about, the father of my child, and someone who had planned to step up. I had to process my grief while carrying his baby, and his parents, Margaret and Thomas, became involved from that moment on. I tried to be understanding. I knew they were grieving, and I didn't want to deny them a connection to their grandchild. So, despite living in different states, we made arrangements for them to visit Sophie twice a month. Ethan's older sister, Olivia, also visited sometimes, though his younger sister, Natalie, lived abroad and mostly kept in touch through phone calls and gifts. From the beginning, there was tension between me and Margaret. She had strong opinions on how I should raise Sophie, what kind of environment I should create for her, and even who I should allow into her life. She never liked that I lived in a different city, and she never stopped pushing for Sophie to spend extended time with them, even suggesting that she live with them for a few months out of the year. That was never going to happen, and I made that clear. I did my best to keep the peace. I traveled to their town 3 times with Sophie, so they could see where her father had grown up, and I sent frequent updates. But it was never enough for them. Everything escalated when I started dating Adam. Adam is 34 and has a 4-year-old daughter, Mia. He and I have been together for almost a year, and things are going well. Our daughters get along wonderfully, and we've slowly been integrating our lives. We don't live together, but we see each other regularly, and our kids have occasional sleepovers. Margaret, of course, disapproved. She made little comments about Adam's presence, about media's influence, and even about his car being parked outside my house. I ignored it at first, but it was clear she didn't like the idea of another man being in Sophie's life, even though Ethan and I were never a couple. Then, 2 weeks ago, I sent an email letting them know our plans for Christmas. Adam and I had decided to host a Christmas Eve gathering with both of our families and some close friends. I invited Margaret and Thomas to join us and also offered for them to take Sophie for lunch on Christmas Day if they preferred. Margaret's response? She and Thomas had already made plans to take Sophie to their home for Christmas. Excuse me? I replied that this was not going to happen. I hadn't agreed to any travel, and Sophie was spending the holiday with me. I didn't hear from her for 2 days. Then she called me and, in the most patronizing tone, told me I was being unreasonable. What do you mean, unreasonable? I asked, already feeling my patience thinning. We have rights, Rachel. We've waited long enough to take Sophie home with us for Christmas. She's older now. She can travel without you. I actually laughed. This isn't a discussion. You don't get to decide this. Margaret's voice sharpened. We are discussing it right now. I hung up the phone. Almost immediately, Thomas called. He was calmer, but his words sent me into a cold fury. Rachel, we bought Sophie's plane tickets 2 months ago. They had planned this behind my back. They had fully expected me to go along with it. No, I said firmly. You don't get to make decisions like this. You should have asked before booking anything. Sophie is my daughter, and I say no. That's when he lost his temper. He accused me of being selfish, of keeping Sophie from her rightful family. And then he delivered the real threat. Apologize to Margaret, he demanded, or we'll take this to court. I was stunned. You're threatening me with a custody battle? You're the one choosing to fight, he snapped. I hung up again. And now, just days later, the court papers have arrived. They are suing me for custody of my own daughter. Their claim? That I am unfit as a mother. I have a lawyer, a damn good one, and she assures me they have almost no chance of winning. The best they can hope for is formalized visitation. But that doesn't mean I'm not scared. They have money, resources, and connections in their home state. They are relentless. Some people in my life support my decision to fight back. Others think I should have just let them take Sophie for Christmas to keep the peace. But this isn't about one holiday. It's about control. It's about setting boundaries. And I refuse to let them walk all over me. This is my daughter, and I will fight for her. The moment I saw the court papers, my stomach dropped. Even though my lawyer had assured me they had almost no chance of winning, I still felt a wave of anxiety crash over me. This wasn't just a disagreement anymore. This was war. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the documents spread out in front of me. The words unfit mother felt like a slap in the face. My hands clenched into fists as I read through the accusations. According to them, I was denying Sophie access to her family, making reckless decisions about her upbringing, and providing an unstable environment by dating Adam. That last part infuriated me the most. They were trying to paint my relationship as a problem when, in reality, Adam was a supportive and loving presence in both my life and Sophie's. Unlike them, he respected my boundaries. My lawyer, Laura, wasted no time. "We're going to fight this aggressively," she said when I met her at her office the next day. "They don't have a legal leg to stand on, but we need to take this seriously." I nodded, my jaw tight. "What's our first step?" "First, we document everything. Every call, every text, every instance where they've overstepped. We need to prove that they aren't just overzealous grandparents, they are actively trying to undermine your role as Sophie's mother." I already had plenty to work with. Margaret's constant interference, their secret plane tickets, and now this baseless lawsuit. I spent hours compiling evidence emails, text messages, even notes from conversations I'd had with them. I wanted to make sure that when we walked into court, there would be no doubt that they were the ones trying to control my child's life, not the other way around. In the meantime, I cut off direct communication. My lawyer insisted that from this point forward, everything needed to go through her. No more phone calls, no more FaceTime, no more unannounced visits. I knew that would send them into a rage, but I didn't care. They had made their choice. Sure enough, within days, my phone blew up. Margaret sent a flurry of messages, ranging from pleading to outright threats. "Margaret, Rachel, let's be reasonable. Sophie needs her grandparents. We just want what's best for her. Margaret, ignoring us is only making this worse. We're going to fight for our rights. Margaret, you can't keep her from us forever. The courts will see the truth." I didn't respond. Then, Thomas tried calling. When I ignored him, he left a voicemail. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "Rachel, I don't know what's gotten into you, but you need to stop acting like we're the enemy. We're family. All we want is time with Sophie. You can't win this by cutting us out. Call me back." I deleted it without hesitation. The next day, Adam found me sitting on the couch, rubbing my temples as I went through yet another round of legal paperwork. "How are you holding up?" he asked, sitting beside me. I sighed. I feel like I'm living in some nightmare. They're treating me like I'm the bad guy when all I've done is set boundaries. He reached for my hand. "They're not going to win." I wanted to believe that, but the stress was eating at me. I had never wanted to be in a courtroom, fighting against people who claimed to love my daughter. But I wasn't going to let them bully me into submission. A few days later, we had our first court hearing. Margaret and Thomas sat across from me, their faces stony. They had hired an expensive lawyer, but it didn't matter. Laura was relentless. She presented our evidence methodically, laying out a clear picture of their overreach. She showed the judge their excessive messages, their attempts to dictate my parenting, and their unilateral decision to buy plane tickets without consulting me. Margaret's lawyer tried to argue that they were simply devoted grandparents who wanted a stronger relationship with Sophie. But when pressed about why they had filed for custody, instead of just requesting more visitation, Margaret's carefully crafted facade cracked. "She belongs with us," Margaret blurted out. "She needs stability," Laura pounced. "Are you suggesting that her mother, the woman who has raised her since birth, is not providing stability?" Margaret hesitated. You mean that you believe you should be the primary influence in Sophie's life, despite having no legal grounds to take that role?" Silence. The judge listened, expression unreadable, but I knew we had made our point. By the end of the hearing, the judge ruled in my favor for now, stating that there was no immediate reason to alter custody arrangements. Margaret and Thomas were granted temporary visitation, but only under strict conditions. They couldn't take Sophie out of state, and every visit had to be scheduled in advance and approved by me. I could see the defeat on their faces. This wasn't the victory they had expected, but I knew this wasn't over. This was just the beginning. The days following that disastrous phone call were tense. I tried to keep my routine as normal as possible for Clara, but there was an underlying anxiety in everything I did. The fact that James and Linda had gone so far as to file for custody still felt surreal. I wasn't just angry, I was shaken. These were people I had trusted with my daughter, people I had allowed into her life, and now they were trying to use the legal system to take her away from me. My lawyer was quick to respond. She reassured me that their case was weak at best, but that didn't mean I could afford to take it lightly. She told me to document everything, every interaction, every message, every moment of overreach. I spent hours compiling records of their visits, text messages, and even voice recordings of conversations I had with them in the past where they acknowledged that I was the sole parent. If they were going to fight me on this, I was going to make sure they had no ground to stand on. In the meantime, I also had to make some difficult decisions about boundaries. My lawyer advised me to cut off any direct communication with them. That meant no phone calls, no texts, and no FaceTime sessions with Clara. Everything had to go through legal channels. It felt drastic, but after what they pulled, I wasn't about to give them any more access to my life than necessary. James tried to play the reasonable one, sending an email a few days later. He apologized for the misunderstanding and claimed they had no intention of actually taking Clara from me. They just wanted more time with her, including the ability to take her out of state. He wrote about how much they loved her, how much Jack would have wanted her to be connected to his family. It would have been almost convincing if it wasn't coming from the same man who had threatened legal action just days before. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded it straight to my lawyer. Then came the unexpected development. Lily and Ruth reached out. I hadn't spoken to either of them much outside of brief interactions when they visited Clara, but Lily, who was living in Europe, sent me a message out of the blue, asking if I had received the Christmas gift she mailed for Clara. I hesitated, but then I saw an opportunity. I wrote back, thanking her for the gift, and then I told her briefly what was happening. I didn't go into full detail, but I let her know that her parents had filed for custody and that I was in the middle of dealing with their legal claims. Lily's response was immediate. She was horrified. Within hours, Ruth joined the conversation. She and Lily asked if we could have a video call, and after consulting with my lawyer who advised me to record the call for documentation, I agreed. That call changed everything. Ruth looked exhausted, but not just because of the situation with her parents. She was 22 weeks pregnant, something she had kept quiet from almost everyone, including her mother. She told me that she had been going through IVF for years, struggling under the weight of Linda's expectations. This pregnancy was the first time she had allowed herself to feel hopeful, but she had also gone low contact with Linda because of how much stress her mother caused her. Then, she dropped a bombshell. She hadn't known about the lawsuit. Neither of them had. In fact, their father had tried to keep it from them. When Lily told Ruth what was happening, Ruth confronted James directly. At first, he tried to brush it off, but when she pushed harder, he admitted everything. He claimed he hadn't actually wanted to go through with the lawsuit, that it had been Linda's idea, and that he had only agreed because Linda's mental health had been in freefall. He even admitted that he thought I was a good mother, but that they were hoping to pressure me into allowing more access to Clara. I felt sick. This wasn't just about visitation. This was about control. About them believing they had the right to manipulate me into giving them what they wanted, no matter how unethical it was. Ruth didn't let him off the hook. She told him point blank that if he didn't withdraw the lawsuit, she would go no contact, resign from the family business, and cut them out of her own child's life. That seemed to break him. By the end of the conversation, Ruth had made it clear that she and Lily were on my side. They told me they would do whatever they could to help, including testifying in court if it came to that. When I ended the call, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: relief. The fight wasn't over yet, but for the first time, I felt like I had the upper hand, and I was going to make sure that James and Linda understood, once and for all, that I wasn't someone they could manipulate. Clara was my daughter, and I wasn't going to let them take her from me. As I braced myself for what came next, I knew things were about to escalate even further. My parents and Eric weren't the type to simply accept defeat. If anything, their entitlement only seemed to grow the more I stood my ground. The morning after our confrontation at my apartment, I woke up to a barrage of missed calls and messages. My mother had taken her grievances to social media, painting herself as the victim of a cold, ungrateful son who had abandoned his family in their time of need. The post read something along the lines of, "Family should always come first. It breaks my heart to see my own child turn his back on us when we need him most. After everything we've done for him, he has chosen selfishness over love." It was followed by an outpouring of support from relatives and friends who only knew their side of the story. Comments flooded in, with people expressing their disappointment in me, offering prayers for my misguided soul, and some even outright calling me a disgrace. I should have expected it. Playing the martyr had always been my mother's specialty, and she knew exactly how to manipulate people into sympathizing with her. But the worst part? Eric joined in. He made a post of his own, conveniently leaving out the fact that he was inheriting everything. Instead, he painted me as some greedy, heartless brother who was throwing a tantrum over money. His exact words were, "It's sad when people prioritize money over family. Some people just can't be happy with what they have and would rather tear the family apart for no reason." I clenched my jaw as I read through the comments. People who barely knew me were offering Eric their support, reassuring him that he was the good son for staying by our parents' side. It was infuriating, but I wasn't about to let them control the narrative. Instead of reacting out of anger, I took a deep breath, sat down, and wrote out my own post. I wasn't about to stoop to their level, but I also wasn't going to let them spread lies about me unchecked. I wrote, "For those who have only heard one side of the story, let me clarify. I have supported my parents financially for years, paying their mortgage, covering bills, and making sure they never had to struggle. In return, I found out that they had planned to leave everything to my brother, Eric. Not a single mention of me in their will. They made their choice, and now I am making mine. If I am only good enough to be their wallet, then they can rely on Eric from now on. That's how family works, right?" I posted it and logged off. I wasn't going to spend my day watching the inevitable fallout, but I knew my parents and Eric would see it. By the end of the day, my inbox was flooded. Some relatives messaged me privately, apologizing for jumping to conclusions. Others tried to convince me to be the bigger person and just let things go. A few outright accused me of being cruel and ungrateful. But then came the messages from my parents. First, my mother. "How could you humiliate us like this? This is a private family matter. You had no right to air our dirty laundry." Then my father, "You're making a huge mistake. Family is about sacrifice, not keeping score. This will come back to haunt you." And, of course, Eric, "Wow, real mature. Hope you enjoy your little pity party. You'll regret this." I shook my head and turned off my phone. They were grasping at straws now, desperately trying to regain control of a situation that had spiraled beyond their manipulation. But I wasn't backing down. The next week was eerily quiet. No more messages. No more phone calls. It almost felt like the storm had passed until I received a letter in the mail. It was from my parents' lawyer. I ripped it open, my heart pounding. As I scanned the contents, my stomach twisted in disbelief. They were demanding repayment for financial assistance they had given me throughout my life. It was an itemized list of every single thing they had ever paid for college tuition, rent from when I lived at home, even childhood expenses like food and clothing. The total amounted to an absurd sum, as if they were trying to retroactively charge me for existing. I let out a bitter laugh. This was their final move. If they couldn't guilt me, if they couldn't pressure me, they would try to financially ruin me. But they had miscalculated. I still had every bank statement, every receipt, every proof of payment showing how much I had given them over the years. If they wanted to play dirty, I was more than ready. I called my lawyer. "Let's end this." The weeks following the court proceedings felt like a strange limbo. I had won the legal battle, but it didn't feel like a victory. The tension remained, lingering in the air like a storm that hadn't fully passed. My lawyer assured me that James and Linda had little chance of ever gaining custody, but the fact that they had tried still left me feeling uneasy. I wasn't willing to take any chances. Every interaction with them was now through legal channels, and any visits would remain supervised for the foreseeable future. Ruth and Lily had been unexpectedly supportive throughout everything. Ruth, now 22 weeks pregnant, had been distant for most of the past year, but once she learned the truth about her parents' lawsuit, she had stepped up in a way I hadn't expected. She was furious that James had tried to manipulate me using legal pressure. She even threatened to cut ties with the family business if they didn't drop the case. James caved quickly after that, withdrawing the lawsuit and agreeing to the terms I set for visitation. Linda, however, was another matter entirely. She had finally agreed to therapy, which was one of my conditions for any contact with Clara. But I remained skeptical about whether it would truly change anything. Her attachment to Clara was obsessive, and I couldn't shake the feeling that if given the opportunity, she would try to take her. James insisted that their intentions were not to take my daughter away from me permanently, but that wasn't a risk I was willing to take. Trust had been shattered, and no amount of apologies or explanations would change that. For now, their visits were limited to twice a month, supervised at a family center. A social worker was assigned to oversee these visits, ensuring that no manipulation or boundary pushing occurred. The first visit under these new conditions was uncomfortable, to say the least. Linda barely spoke to me, her eyes filled with resentment. James made an effort to be civil, but there was an undeniable strain. Clara, of course, remained blissfully unaware of the tensions between the adults in her life. She was simply excited to see her grandparents. I watched carefully as they interacted with her. Linda's affection for Clara was clear, but it was laced with something unsettling, something possessive. She clung to Clara, as if she were the only thing keeping her together. When the visit ended and Clara came running back to me, I saw the flash of pain in Linda's expression. It was almost as if she resented the fact that Clara was returning to me at all. That alone reaffirmed that I had made the right decision in setting firm boundaries. Despite everything, I felt relief knowing that I was no longer alone in this fight. Ruth and Lily had taken my side, and my own family had been my unwavering support system. I knew there would be more challenges ahead, but at least I wasn't facing them in isolation anymore. The biggest shift in all of this was Ruth's realization of just how controlling their mother had been. Linda had always favored Jack, and after his passing, she had transferred that intense focus onto Clara. Ruth admitted that she had distanced herself from the family because of the immense pressure Linda put on her to conceive. Every failed attempt at IVF had been met with judgment, as if Ruth's struggles were a personal failure rather than a medical condition. Now that she was finally pregnant, she was determined to keep her distance and set her own boundaries, much like I had. As the weeks passed, I settled into a cautious routine. I remained hyper-aware of any potential threats, even informing my gated community's security team about the situation. While my lawyer assured me that James and Linda wouldn't try anything drastic, I couldn't afford to be naive. I needed to be prepared for any possibility. Then, one afternoon, I received a message from Lily. It was brief, but alarming. "Hey, just a heads up, Mom and Dad are still talking about wanting Clara to visit for longer periods. Mom keeps bringing it up, even after everything. Be careful." My stomach clenched. Even after all this, Linda still hadn't let go of the idea of having Clara for extended visits. I wasn't surprised, but it still sent a wave of unease through me. I responded quickly. "Thanks for letting me know. I'm keeping everything the same on my end. If they try anything, I'll involve my lawyer." Lily sent a thumbs-up emoji, but the message had already done its job. It reinforced that I needed to remain vigilant. The next visitation arrived sooner than I would have liked. This time, Linda seemed more subdued, but there was an edge to her that I couldn't quite place. When the visit ended, she looked at me with an eerie calmness and said, "You know this isn't over, right?" I kept my expression neutral. "The visitation agreement is final. There's nothing else to discuss." Linda smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We'll see." That was the moment I knew she wasn't going to stop. She had backed down for now, but in her mind, she was still fighting for control. And I wasn't about to let my guard down. The finality of everything didn't fully hit me until a few days after I cut off contact. The silence that followed was eerie. My phone no longer buzzed with demands, guilt trips, or desperate attempts to manipulate me. It felt strange at first, almost like something was missing. But then, as the days passed, that silence transformed into peace. Of course, it didn't last forever. It was only a matter of time before my parents found another way to get to me. They had lost control over me financially, and now they needed another angel. I didn't realize what that would be until a close friend of mine, Mark, reached out with a warning. "Hey, man," he said hesitantly. "Your mom posted some stuff online. You might want to check it out." I sighed. I hadn't looked at their social media since the fallout. I had blocked them, but I still had mutual friends who could see everything. When I logged into my account, I saw it immediately. My mom had written a long, dramatic post about how their ungrateful son had abandoned them in their time of need. The comments were full of sympathy, distant relatives chiming in with their disappointment in me, even some old family friends offering to help them through this betrayal. But what really set me off was Eric's post. Some people don't understand the value of family. They turn their backs the moment they don't get their way. I'll always stand by our parents, no matter what. Loyalty matters. Loyalty, that word burned a hole in my chest. The irony of it all, where was their loyalty to me when they made that will? When they decided that my years of hard work and sacrifices meant nothing? Where was Eric's loyalty when he sat back and enjoyed everything I provided, never once offering to help? They had rewritten the story entirely. I wasn't the one who had been cast aside. I was the villain who had turned my back on my family. I debated for hours about what to do. Should I ignore it? Should I post my own version of events? Would it even matter? Eventually, I decided on something simple. I left one comment under my mother's post. Funny how none of this was a problem when I was paying all your bills. That was it. No long explanations, no justifications. Just one cold, hard truth. Within minutes, the comment section exploded. Relatives messaged me privately, some trying to smooth things over, others calling me selfish. My parents didn't respond directly, but Eric did. He sent me a text, and for the first time, it wasn't dripping with entitlement. It was short. Eric, are you really done with all of us? I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Me? I didn't walk away. You all pushed me out. Now you're mad that I finally let go. No response. I think for the first time, he actually understood. As the weeks passed, the dust began to settle. I focused on myself for the first time in years. I wasn't supporting anyone else. I wasn't scrambling to keep others afloat. I was living for me. It was liberating. Then one day, I got a message from my father. It was short, businesslike. He said they were going to sell the house. They couldn't afford it without my help, and Eric wasn't in a position to take it over. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. They had made their decision a long time ago. Now, they were living with the consequences. The house was listed within a month. I saw the photos online. The place I had spent years helping maintain now reduced to just another property on the market. It felt final. And honestly, that was okay. I wasn't bitter anymore. I wasn't angry. I had let it all go. The last time I heard from Eric, he had finally gotten a job, nothing glamorous, just something to keep him afloat. Maybe, for the first time in his life, he was learning what it meant to take responsibility. Maybe not. It wasn't my concern anymore. As for me, I moved forward. I built a life that was mine and mine alone. And for the first time in my life, I was truly free.